Daniel's alarm shrieked at 5:30 a.m. The same merciless sound that had carved grooves into his soul for the past 8 years. He rolled out of bed, muscles protesting, and shuffled to his father's room. The old man lay propped against pillows, breathing labored eyes, vacant since the stroke. "Morning, Dad," Daniel whispered, adjusting the blankets with hands that had grown rough from years of caregiving. His father's eyes flickered with brief recognition before drifting away again. In the kitchen, Daniel prepared 2 bowls of oatmeal, one for his father, who would barely touch it, and one for himself that he'd eat standing up while mentally rehearsing his day. Work by 8 a.m. Lunch skipped to run errands for his father's medications. Evening shift because Marcus needed to pick up his kids. Then home by 10 p.m. to help his father to bed. His phone buzzed. A photo from his sister, Alina, in Barcelona. Laughing face pressed against her husband's at some rooftop cafe. "Miss you, little brother." The caption read, his brother Jake had sent a video from Sydney last week, diving into crystal clear waters. Daniel stared at the corner where his guitar leaned against the wall. Strings dulled with neglect. He'd bought it during his college years when he'd dreamed of writing songs, maybe even performing. Now it served as an expensive dust collector, a monument to the person he used to be. "You're so dependable, Daniel," everyone said. "What would we do without you?" He used to feel proud of those words. Now they felt like chains. The rain hammered the city like bullets, each drop exploding against the pavement in a symphony of chaos. Daniel stood at the bus stop, his cheap umbrella having surrendered to the wind 3 blocks ago. His shirt clung to his skin, cold and suffocating, while water dripped from his hair into his eyes. He'd stayed until 9 p.m. fixing Sarah's Mistake a Client presentation. That would have cost them the account. The 5th time this month he'd covered for someone else's negligence. His supervisor had clapped him on the back and said, "You're a lifesaver, Dan," before rushing off to his own warm car. The bus approached through the rain like a yellow beacon of hope when his phone buzzed. "Hey, can you take my weekend shift again? It's my anniversary. You're the best." Daniel stared at the message from Marcus, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. The words he'd typed 1,000 times before. Sure. No problem felt impossible to form. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with a profound, aching recognition of his own disappearance. When had he become a ghost in his own life? "No, I can't." He sent the message and immediately turned off his phone, his hands shaking. That night, he sat in his apartment's darkness, the only light coming from his old amber desk lamp. He reached for his guitar with trembling fingers, feeling the cool metal strings against his calloused fingertips. The first chord he strummed was tentative, broken, like a voice learning to speak again. As the music filled the silence, tears rolled down his cheeks, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of hearing his own voice after years of silence. The Coffee Beans open mic night was every Thursday at 8 p.m. Daniel had learned from the flyer he'd studied for 3 weeks before finding the courage to attend. He sat in the back corner, guitar case between his knees, watching strangers pour their hearts out on the tiny stage. "I wrote this about my divorce," announced a woman with silver hair and tired eyes. Her voice cracked as she sang about empty beds and echoing hallways. And Daniel felt his chest tighten with recognition. When his name was called, his legs felt like water. The spotlight was a harsh interrogation, and faces in the darkness seemed to judge his every breath. He adjusted the microphone with sweaty palms. "This is called Invisible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wrote it this week." The first chord rang out, and then his voice followed, raw, unpolished, authentic. He sang about fading into the background, about becoming everyone's solution while losing himself in the process, about rain-soaked bus stops and silent guitars. The room fell completely quiet. When he finished, the silence stretched for an eternity before someone started clapping. Then another person. Then everyone. An older man approached him afterward, eyes bright with understanding. "That was brave, son. Really brave." Daniel packed his guitar with shaking hands, something fundamental shifting inside his chest. He'd spent years being who others needed him to be. Tonight, for 4 minutes and 37 seconds, he'd been himself, walking home under the streetlights. He called his father's night nurse. "I won't be home until late on Thursdays anymore," he said simply. "I'm performing music." For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. "This is ridiculous, Daniel." His father's voice was stronger than it had been in months, fueled by indignation. "Music at your age." Daniel sat beside his father's bed, calloused, fingers still sore from the previous night's practice. "I'm still here, Dad. I'm just also there for myself." "Selfish," his father muttered, turning toward the wall. "Your mother would be ashamed." The words hit like physical blows, but Daniel breathed through the pain. He'd heard variations of this conversation from everyone: his supervisor, questioning his sudden unavailability; Elena's concerned calls from Barcelona about his midlife crisis; friends who'd grown comfortable with his constant availability, expressing bewilderment at his new boundaries. "You're different," Sarah from work had said, her voice carrying accusation. You used to be so helpful. I'm still helpful, Daniel had replied, just not exclusively. The Thursday night performances became his anchor. Each week, he felt more confident, his voice growing stronger, his songs more honest. He wrote about the guilt of choosing himself, about the strange grief of letting others down, about the terrifying freedom of saying no. Marcus had stopped speaking to him entirely after Daniel declined to cover another weekend shift. Fine, Marcus had said, but don't expect any favors from me. I won't, Daniel had replied quietly, and meant it. The hardest part wasn't the anger or disappointment from others, was the voice in his own head that whispered he was being selfish, irresponsible, cruel. Some nights he'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if everyone was right. But then Thursday would come, and he'd stand on that small stage and remember who he was beneath all the expectations. 6 months later, Daniel stood before his bathroom mirror, guitar pick in his hand, a small ritual that had become sacred. Thank you for coming back, he whispered to his reflection, noting the way his eyes had regained their light, how his shoulders no longer carried the weight of everyone else's needs. The part-time position at the community center had materialized. After one of his Thursday night performances, Mrs. Chen, the director, had approached him with tears in her eyes. We need someone who understands music comes from the heart, she'd said. Would you consider teaching our adult beginners? Now, 3 evenings a week, Daniel watched middle-aged dreamers like himself learn to play guitar, their faces lighting up with the same wonder he'd rediscovered in his apartment that rainy night. Yesterday, Margaret, a 52-year-old accountant, had played her first complete song, a shaky rendition of House of the Rising Sun, that had moved everyone to tears. His relationship with his father had evolved into something more honest. The old man still grumbled about Daniel's music phase, but there was grudging respect in his eyes. Daniel had hired additional help with the insurance money he'd been too guilty to use before, and their time together had become more meaningful, less resentful. Elena had visited last month, sitting in the front row of his Thursday night performance. Afterward, she'd hugged him tightly and whispered, I'm proud of you for finding yourself again. Not everyone had come around. Marcus still avoided him at work, and some friendships had faded. But Daniel had discovered something profound. The people who truly mattered supported his transformation, while those who resented it had only loved what he could do for them, not who he was. This morning, he'd received a text from a stranger. Your song, Invisible, helped me leave my toxic job. Thank you for your courage. Standing in his living room, Daniel picked up his guitar, no longer gathering dust, but gleaming with regular use. As he strummed the opening chords of his newest song, he smiled. He'd finally learned the most important lesson of his life. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And everything else grows from there.